I would say I've given it some thought. And earlier, I would have said it was probably 50-50. Now, what I'm realizing is that 50% that I've gathered and gotten an understanding of has clarified my understanding of what she taught me.
I guess the best way to answer that is 100% of it is what I learned from her. Even the stuff that I learned on my own, because it reminded me of something that she had said or done that I hadn't quite understood at the time. I mean, I have studied with other people and I have gleaned things from them, but I don't think there was an eternal truth to singing that anyone...
Well, like I said, the seeds were planted, I think because I was guided by her when I sang on the stage, and then when I stopped singing on the stage and I started to, I kind of saw myself in this dual career of singing and teaching, and the singing did that and the teaching did this. But I think, and I know she did this, that she said when she did a master class at Nats, I did the same thing, a master class at Nats. And she stood up there and she said, if you're going to teach singing, you need to sing. Even if it's at your local church, if it's at your at the Metropolitan Opera, but you need to have experienced singing if you're going to teach singing. Mm-hmm. I believe that too. That's not necessarily the case anymore, but I think that while I was on the job learning to sing and still under her, care, and then when I started to teach, I remember when I started to teach, I had people say, you're not supposed to teach. You're just supposed to sing. And I'm really glad I have this pension that 35 years gave me. So, and she kind of gave me that permission to teach. She recognized that in our years in Princeton and said, yep, she got me the job at Westminster. Mm-hmm. They needed a part-time person, and she said, she's got good ears, she's got instincts, hire her. Mm-hmm. But I think what evolved from that core was continuing to research, continuing to read and be curious about singing, be curious about learning styles. Mm-hmm. I wish that I had gotten an education degree. I wish that I had not gotten 2 performance degrees, so I'd had some sense of learning the way people learn. But I've figured that out for myself. Yeah. I have been a repertoire hound. I did 2 sabbaticals where I did a study of operatic arias and when to assign arias and what to listen for, and that gave me a lot more ammunition in my lessons. Listening to my colleagues and learning from my colleagues. Being in an academic situation, you really can soak things up from your colleagues, which they may describe something differently than you've done it, and it just gives you a whole new different way to think about it. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, is I'm very curious about the voice. I'm curious about my students. I'm curious about, and when I stop being curious about it, I won't teach anymore. But I still am not trying to reinvent the wheel, but I try to find the 101st way to say the same thing.
Well, the first thing I discovered, and I often joke, I need to give the money back to my students my first few years of teaching. I really feel like I owe them a huge apology. And the reason is this: I was so full of Margaret Harshaw that I was going to press that down their throats, whether they should have had Margaret Harshaw or not, because every kid doesn't have the mechanics, the musculature, the body build to accommodate a sophisticated technique like the Harshaw technique. That doesn't mean that there aren't portions of it that really help even a modestly talented person. But there were some kids, and I just discovered them, and I realized you have to be, you gotta let it go, and perhaps maybe going around the end of the building, you may find a back entrance that might help that kid who ends up being a great contributor to his home church in his community or his community choir or whatever, or in a Broadway sense and so forth and so on. So that was my big reveal, that not what is it, one size fits all. It does not. And I tried to make that happen earlier on in my career. I grew up, I got older, and I started to really learn to listen critically and open-heartedly. Did I give up on some students? Yes. It just came to the point where I just couldn't, and they were unwilling and unable, and we smiled and went for coffee sometimes. I have one student who now remains one of my most brilliant students, who his voice, he just couldn't find his voice. Smarter than smart, motivated, and I got him a job as the assistant props director at the Chattanooga Opera. The next semester, he was the head of props at the Chattanooga Opera. The next semester, he was the assistant stage manager, and the next semester, I took him to Bloomington, and he auditioned for the Master of Stage Management program, and he became one of the most renowned stage managers in the world of opera. And now he's the executive director of a major motion picture tech firm, international, whatever. I could have tried to cram that technique, and he would have been unhappy. And I said, he's so smart and knows so much about music. Let me find another avenue for his muse. And I was lucky that I was able to do that. That's an example of that.
Yeah.
One of the things that I have found is that I have found other ways to say things than Miss Harshaw necessarily said to me. And I'm sure she had that experience too. Like, she probably said things about the same thing to you one way and said it a different way to me, because a good teacher, which we all know she was a great teacher, understands how to communicate with each student. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things you figure out. Miss Harshaw, I'm sure she did that, that, and there were issues, that Miss Harshaw would tell me about that I didn't do, but she would tell me that she would work with someone else on. And so in that sense, I know there have been times when I've been teaching where I didn't have big, huge tongue problems that she dealt, but she would tell me about people's tongue. And so then when I would be teaching myself, I would have to really think about what she would tell me about someone else, mm-hmm. because we never really talked a lot about my tongue. Yeah. And so in that sense, and I would feel like sometimes, Michael, when I would be teaching, especially in the beginning when I started teaching a lot, I just wouldn't know what was wrong. And I was, in my mind, I didn't say her name in my mind, but I would say, what is wrong? And it was almost like I would hear this voice go, look at their tongue. Look at what they're doing with their tongue. Mm-hmm. And whereas I would have never, had I not thought in that way, I don't know if it's her voice talking to me or not, but I don't think I would have, this may not be about your question, but I don't think necessarily left on my own, I would have noticed as much as what I did is when I thought about what she... So did I change what she taught me?
No, it's more about things you discovered on your own versus things she told you.
I've talked to some people who studied with her who've told me that, mm-hmm. that they discovered, but I don't think I really did, because I understood that what Ms. Harshaw was teaching was simple, mm-hmm. and it was and that's not complicated.
It's not, no.
And so I that was always foremost in my mind, and I might have found another way to say that.
That's exactly it.
but I was always.
Yeah. She said to me on a few occasions, she'd come in and she said, "I've been thinking about you all week. Now let's try this."
Yes.
You know, and she'd have something new that we'd never done before, and she may have done it with no one else before. I don't know. And I think that was part of her success as a teacher.
Yeah.
Was first of all always to be thinking and trying to find new ways of explaining the same thing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And getting at it that way. And I think that's, I think that's a big part of her brilliance, because she would say herself the technique is, she didn't invent the technique. It's been around for a long time.
Making good sound is pretty basic.
Yeah.
I don't know that, now there are a lot of people who may not agree with that and have at it, but it's pretty basic, but people are not basic, and you have to find ways to communicate to your student.
Exactly.
And so you might say things a little different sometimes.
I'd say probably a little bit of even weight. I think it balances out. A lot of the stuff that when I've read stuff and researched stuff, some of it I'll look at it and say, well, that's kind of the same thing, but not. But the ideas of support, the ideas of learning, getting your voice to, finding the place so that it really is going to go. And I was working so much with musical theater kids, and which was a totally different kind of a thing. Yeah. But, I thought there's got to be you can make a hybrid version of this, I mean, Harshaw would have been absolutely horrified, trying to teach somebody, mixed belt, but I was going to do it with the concept of trying to keep the throat open, trying to support it, trying to do all these different things. And I had some students where it worked spectacularly, and they were like, wow. And I just said, oh, that's, it's classical technique, And I kept telling them, if you use classical technique, your voice will last. Yeah. And that was Harshaw's big thing. You want your voice to last. She said once, I heard her in an interview, and she said, if you're looking for a teacher, find a teacher that had a career, but also had a voice problem, struggled, and got through it. And she said, there's your teacher. Because a lot of the best singers have to overcome some kind of adversity at some point, in their singing. And because it's not all roses, as all of us know. Yeah. And so it's the kind of thing that I, and with my students, that I would try to say the same thing, that you want your voice to last. If you're screaming yourself to death, there's a difference in scream. You can healthily belt. You really can, and it is possible, but So I mean, like I say, I think that trying to apply it that way.
It's been long enough now. I'm not sure I can accurately say. And as we're talking about it, I'm just realizing even more how much influence she has in everything that I do. It felt like for a long time I was creating my own language and using that more. So I think that's true, but thinking about it today, probably 50-50. It's a pretty good combination. Yeah, I had to learn to talk about it differently than she and I talked about it. But I think that's a generational thing too. Because now I've been doing it long enough that I'm into the next generation of it. And just the other day I was with somebody 21 years old, and I sat there and thought, this could be my grandson. Oh my God. But just realizing that he's even of a different generation than some of the pros that I started with now. And so I'm going to say 50-50. Okay. I think that's fair.
I thought about that, and it's at least half. It's probably more than half. I was fortunately well taught before her. Dan Pratt, Carol Mayo, Carol Blackner Mayo, or Mayo, I forget, I'm sorry, Carol. And then Jack Coldiron. in Fort Worth, Texas, who just passed a couple of years ago. And he had studied with Mac Harrell, who was a classmate with Ms. Harshaw, with Sharon Renee at Juilliard. And so I don't feel that I had a lot of tearing down and rebuilding to do with her, but much more purposeful and more specific in some ways. So I'm already, and since then I've integrated so much into my own singing, and like probably most teachers, my teaching has a lot to do with my singing. And so I will admit my best work as a teacher has been with baritones and tenors, with men especially, and basses too, a few. But so whether I use the same concepts or the same words, and I sometimes do, and I will almost always say, Miss Harshaw used to say. I will quote her, from time to time. And I assigned them to read an article so they knew who I'm talking about. Otherwise, who knows these days? So much people don't know. You can't assume anything, that they know. So, I just it's sort of the operating system has changed. I really value a lot the Alexander technique and the concept of availability and direction and dynamic rather than static. So all the things that could be interpreted as static, like hold this in place, don't let it collapse, that can't be translated as concrete. So it's just a more insistent engagement, So engaging as opposed to holding or pressing or shoving or pulling. But I don't think she was ever about the holding or shoving or pulling. She would so often talk about, she was not hesitant to mention other students in particular and other singers, and she'd say, he just sang in his neck. But the whole singing in his neck idea had to do with the tongue being retracted and tightened and pulled down and jamming the larynx and all of that sort of real manipulation physically, as opposed to physical processes that are integrated with each other and things working towards the values that we know are the right ones.
The things that I've discovered would be things that support what she would have told me, but things that maybe weren't accessible to her at that time. She told, things keep coming up. She told me in like the 1980s, she said, "You're too stiff." She said, "You're too rigid, you're too stiff. You need to do yoga." Now, I am sure Ms. Harshaw did not do a day of yoga in her life, but she understood that was something that I needed to do. And I will tell you that over the course of my life, I have done yoga. I'm a certified yoga teacher now, and I incorporate that into my teaching all the time. But it's in support of a position that she would have wanted, but to find it by moving certain muscles, a little bit more specific with the muscle because of that training. So that I would say is different. I have ways, I would say that the way that she taught us, she gave us a lot of really concrete information and then some imagery. And we all come up with our own imagery. So the imagery is what I see as imagery, and hopefully will prompt my students to come up with their own imagery. And I've heard some really interesting imagery, and I'm like, well, if it means something to you, I have no idea what you're talking about, but if it means something to you, great. So percentage-wise, that's where it's different, but the basic tenets are still, for me, are really still the same, but I add in, there are certain things that I know that I maybe don't emphasize as much as she did because we are in a different time, and I can't undo these students in the same way that she could undo us. They have too many auditions and too many responsibilities that people are gonna hear. I don't lighten up the technique. I don't dumb it down at all. But I have to kind of sneak some things in and not in the same way that she could completely undo us. So that would be maybe the biggest change, but that's due to situation. I can't see. I can't find a way around it yet, and maybe I will eventually. Or times will change so much that I really will have to abandon certain things. I hope not, because my intention is not the technical tenets, but how I go about doing them. So one of my students refers to it as educational tension. And so sometimes I might have to, when I learned, there was a lot of educational tension. And then that was okay, because that's how you learned, the muscles learned what they needed to do. But I try to lessen that a little bit, because I just don't think they have the time to do that the way I had the time to do that, and those before me had the time to do it. So I'd say that's the biggest way that I have changed what she does.
I would say that 90% of what I teach is what she taught me, easily, maybe more. Because anything else that I discovered was kind of an outgrowth of that. I never had an experience where I thought, she was wrong about this. Not ever.
In the limited teaching that I've done, I will usually, we talked about the three main tenets: the low breath, the open throat, the high placement. Oftentimes, I'll encounter young singers who have one of those, or two of those maybe, especially if it's a more advanced singer. Rarely all three. And I'll always preface, I haven't given many private lessons, only a few, and not many in person. Did a lot of that sort of thing over COVID, via Zoom, and I saw some people that way.
That's hopefully you teach.
Oh yeah, I mean and like Laura will say to me, Laura Brooks Rice says to me, look, I can one thing that I can't hear everything, but I am aware when the voice is speaking, because when the voice is speaking, I can tell it. If the voice is speaking the same way, it's easy for me to hear it, so this we can talk about. And of course musically we can talk about music, but I mean it's just not the optimal, not the same. So I usually do try to make sure that they get a clue. If I feel like their chest is open but the voice is stuck right here, I might work with them a little bit. But I have to admit that in the teaching I've done, I've been a little careful, because if I can't be there to shepherd them all the way through, I certainly have heard singers who get a 20-minute lesson in a master class and then beat that thing to death that they worked on, which ignores virtually everything else. And so I'm usually quite careful about what I say technically to anyone, and I always finish it up with, please take what I said to your teacher. Take it to the person who knows your voice the best. Integrate it with everything that you're trying to do, so that you get. But I mean, what I need more of your chest in the sound. I'm getting all front position, and that's great for sending noise. But it's you're ignoring half the sound that you could be making, and that sort of thing. Talk to your teacher about it, because. I'm just not there yet, and I don't know if it was up to me to take me as a student where I came to Miss Harshaw at that point, or if I was younger. God, I think of my very first voice teacher, who had to deal with not just a kid who didn't know anything about singing but didn't care at all about opera and was joined a social fraternity, and I mean, really, I had the anti-music major career as a college student. But I mean, if I had to build a voice from zero, I mean, I hope I could do it, but I think it would be hard. And of course, teaching, you learn. you're learning. You learn how to teach as you teach, and we don't have a chance to. If you're not doing it, how are you going to get good at it?
Exactly.
So, and there's plenty of us who never went the teaching route, or who went the teaching route but never taught anything. And by God, I can think of 3 people immediately who I know had famous singing careers that became teachers who nobody got a thing out of. 3 people immediately right now. I'm sure there were others. I'm lucky that we're both lucky that we had this opportunity to be with somebody who did it all the way, and was able to talk about how it got done.